25 miles.
No, I think
And he wouldn't tell me the name of the Episcopal church. He said it belonged to his mother.
Surprised the heck out of me. I thought about it for about 20 seconds and just went,
You know, basically
Hard and sharp.
giving out a lot
plus
of
I've never seen any of it.
empty details at the same time, you know?
That's a good.
And there was a fall out
I'll think some of the other three
mother, member of the Episcopal church. It's not this one.
So is my house, but I had to check.
They were all in line for retirement.
They belong to him.
Trying to find
I
somebody.
can give you the name of it.
Elevating
And
somebody.
it was just, but she's recently died. And,
At least that was a surprise when
I
that came.
have these things in my closet.
I wasn't surprised by the initial information, but the whole blue line and all that was, like I said, I thought about
Oh, people can drop
Worse
them.
in the dark over that.
I don't know.
But that's the first time anybody's ever dropped off, you know, saying, basically, you know, the robes, the vestry items that they wear, the little,
we'll talk after this. Good.
just like a scarf, put around their neck.
Once they get that internal conflict,
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the January 31st, 2011 Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting. Mrs. Forsberg, will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Coaston.
Here.
Councilmember Russell. Councilmember McDaniel.
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember Morris.
Here.
Councilmember Delavar.
Present.
And Councilmember Shoemaker.
Here. Thank you. We are at that early part in the meeting when we are open for public comments for the council before we get going. Anybody that would like to address the council?
I would,
Mr. Olson.
which is kind of unusual, Mayor.
We haven't seen you for a while.
Well, I've been on vacation, sir.
Oh, okay.
I do like to go on vacations and take trips. If I may have just about 30 seconds extra, I would like to make a comment a follow-up comment on what I talked to you folks about last year on tongue-in-cheek Washougal annexing Camas. And now I see in the local paper very recently where the local newspaper, the Columbian, is probably in favor of it. And they have actually submitted some names in their paper, one of which was the same name I submitted to the council at that time, which was WAMAS, W-A-M-A-S. And I just thought that maybe now that the Columbian has endorsed the annexation of Washougal taking over Camas, I think that's a good idea. Now, getting to something serious, Mayor, council members, my name is Harvey Olson, 3903 R Street, and in the January 29th Columbian reported the appointment of their first non-family CEO at corporate Pendleton Woolen Mills. What this will mean for the Pendleton Mill at Washougal, only time will tell. An example of what could happen, and actually did happen, to a family-owned company in California. They were forced to close because of increased utility costs. They sold their plant, which is about 2.5, 3 square blocks, and had to lay off over 100 people. They moved out of the state. They looked at Eastern Oregon, Washington, and settled in Idaho. And now their product is now made in the state of Idaho, all because of increased costs of utility bills. Now, Pendleton Mills has a new CEO who is instrumental in helping the Bishop family, who has owned Pendleton for 100 years. He prepared a plan for the future direction of the Pendleton Mills, and they have now appointed him as CEO. Only a few people are privy to their plan, but a business has to make a profit or they will close up shop. Pendleton, with a new plan in place, could, due to a huge increase in utility costs, close their plant in Washougal and move to China, another state, or another country. If this happens, approximately 138 people employed now would be unemployed and go on the dole, which is unemployment insurance. The manager at Pendleton asked late last year at a council meeting for consideration from huge water costs that are in upcoming rate increases. Was there a message to the council by him? It's hard to say. I don't know. Pendleton Mills has been Washougal's only manufacturing company for years. If they close and move to another state or country, that would be a huge loss in our tax base. You can help them, but will you? I don't know. That's up to the council, it's up to the laws, it's up to a lot of factors. I have no control over that. But now I'm going to challenge each one of you again, like I did last year, to spend time, if you've never owned a company, if you've never been a CEO, go and spend some time with a local company at the end of the month, the quarter, tax time, whatever, and find out what it takes, and then hopefully understand that business has to make a profit. And costs that are incurred by local cities, states, and counties and so forth are really what would take the tree of money that business provides, and if you pull enough leaves off of that tree, the tree's going to die. So just keep that in mind. And there is no such thing as free money. We all know that. Money that comes from business and manufacturing directly or indirectly through their employees are what the cities, counties, states, and federal government rely on to operate. Boy, I wrote this thing up really, really fast, and now about 97 to 99% of all income that governments rely, that go to governments of all levels, they rely on that to pay their bills. The city council members control, for the most part, the cost to set up a new business in a town. And please keep that and increases in all fees and taxes and so forth and utilities in mind when you vote on these things and increase the cost of business. Please be conservative in your approach to business. They are the lifeblood to your salaries and to everything that goes on in the city. And I thank you very much for your time. Now, if you have any questions about the company in California, I know the CEO, and I would be happy to share that if anybody has a question.
Thank you, Harvey.
Okay?
I know Pendleton specific, I know Mr. Evers and Mr. Scott have certainly been meeting with Charlie on a somewhat regular basis.
I know that.
We're actually doing some things with them. It sounds like they may actually be, we may be expanding some services to them, so.
I love it.
Would be a
Thank
good
you.
thing. Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to address the council? Okay. Bridget, good evening. Welcome. Why don't you come on up, however you would like to do this.
I'm sitting ahead of the table. I should introduce myself. I'm Bridget McClemmer from Children's Home Society. And I actually brought 10 folders with material, and these Galaxy folders I hasten to have in case anybody thinks we're an affluent organization. We're funded by Boeing as a part of an outreach mechanism. I have 10 of them, and a little more than 10 of you, so. But I figured it covered council.
If we can make sure that we've got council members covered and the city clerk covered, I bet we're doing good for the moment.
So it was really interested to be invited by RJ to come talk to you. It actually caused me to go back in our archive files and maybe with a little bit much of a paper order, but I did find the original documents from when the center was founded, and it was an initiative of Mayor Sorensen back in 1988, and we were part of the original moves along with Columbia River, who's still a partner of the center. And guess the Washougal School District was a partner then, and the Community Chest of Counts in Washougal. And Community Chest has been an amazing partner over the years. So on the left-hand side in your folder are just some historic documents I just thought you might get a kick out of seeing. And maybe not relevant to tonight's discussion, it just struck me that sometimes you don't look back as much as looking forward. And I was sort of not amused, I was impressed that in 1990, we nominated the city of, Children's Home Society nominated the city of Washougal for a Municipal Achievement Award for the innovation in creating the social center. But you're all pretty familiar with the building across the street. It's had 2 CDBG grants over the years, one to start up the center and one more recently to modernize and put in physical data in Washougal. But more importantly, to create program space upstairs and downstairs. When we moved in there was some space in the basement, but it really wasn't up to code. And so we were very limited in what we can do. There's a lot of material about our programs here, but I know I've talked to you before about our programs in the center, and I sense that the subject of the center came up in the discussions around the budget, and I know you've got a terrible time with budgets as the stage and the country right now with declining resources and increasing needs. And that's one thing I did want to emphasize, is that we are seeing need increasing, and we do meet a need in this community. And I guess what I want to do is frame the center as a real place that your investment of dollars really creates a place that leverages community resources to maximum effect. We get donations from the community, we call them in-kind donations, of around $50,000 a year. And that's clothing, food, various supports like a Seroptimus gives us $500 to help women who are in emergency need, whether it's a uniform for starting a training program as a CNA, or it's somebody who can't afford laundry soap and needs to get the family wash done. So that's an amazing record. What we have all day long is community members coming in, making donations, and we in turn give those donations away. There are some numbers around income levels for most participants. Most make under $1,700, I think, a month. And these are primarily people with families that we serve. We very much focus around helping people either temporarily or on an ongoing basis. And when I say ongoing, it's primarily things like services like therapy and home visiting, which are funded by program funds. So when we look at the center, we actually operate with 2 sources of funding. One is center sources and one set is program resources. So for instance, our mental health, children's mental health counseling, they're Medicaid funded children, so it doesn't come out of dollars which are donated to the operation of the center. As I say, we get a lot of in-kind donations. I should number the pages, but under item number 1, you can see the in-kind donations. It does not include Stuff the Bus, which is an amazing community effort each year. What I didn't include in here were the information and resource phone calls that we get. It's an average of 280, 300 a month, which comes to around 3,500 calls per year. So those are people that we're helping with information on how to access different services, how to reach the right people. And one of our primary goals is to increase access to resources. So we've got a new partnership, for example, with the CSO, where they've installed a computer in the copy there where people can access directly the paperwork and the forms that they need to complete so that they don't have to track into Vancouver each time. And if you think about it, to get into Vancouver and back and sit at the CSO waiting for resources, it's pretty hard to do that in the time that, for example, a child's in school. So these are some of the ways that we're helping local people get back on track with training programs and work access and the resources that CSO has available for pretty impacted people who have minimum resources and who are a little isolated when they're out here without sufficient funds for buses and cars. We've started a few programs in the last year that sort of are small, but they help people. Things like the backpack program, we work with the schools to provide a backpack with food to help kids over the weekend. And we look at getting resources that are easy for a child or a family to use with minimum help. We do about 5 to 10 backpacks a week. And the neat thing about any of these programs is they really respond to a need in the community, and they're staffed by volunteers from the community. A group, and I can't remember their name, that's pretty bad, but they've just started a laundry day. And they are at the local laundromat, and we provide the soap and bleach or whatever the family needs, and they help families with the cost of doing loads of laundry. So again, our primary role and why we're such an important resource is that we're an exchange mechanism within the community. Washuble's amazing for the way people want to give, but if there's not a structure to give, it's sometimes hard to make sure that things reach the right people. And further back in this sheet, you'll see a page that lists the various people that we partner with. Over 16 different faith organizations help us out with donations of food and clothing and resources. Wells Fargo very recently came out to stop the bus, and we organized a lot of food storage. They actually donated us 10 pinatas to give away to families. Most amazingly creative things. The Baha'i faith drops off food. The local Catholic Church refers people to us. We can provide, with a voucher, we can provide a bus pass to people, and then sometimes picks up the cost of that. So it's a way for churches to coordinate their giving as well. Often it's a lot to have somebody on site. I know, 10 years ago, probably each of the churches had their own program, and it's almost impossible to have a staff person there during the day available and to do some initial verification. So it's a really handy way for congregations to satisfy, their desire to help the community without tying down a staff member and having to take the time. And one of the things we try to do when these families come in is not just go for the obvious clothing or food or whatever. We try to talk to people to understand why they have needs, whether we can do anything to help move off the needs, and whether we can help the family identify what their goals are so they can move ahead. But I know your big problem, as with all cities and everyone, is a question around how much it costs. The city has provided $10,000 towards our operating revenue for the past few years. It was reduced to $7,500, I believe, this year. And towards the back, you will see some financial statements. I hope you appreciate a closer understanding of how we operate the center. If you look, mine seem to be out of order, of course. Not very good business, but you'll see there's a family support 2009-10 budget. And at that time, we projected a revenue of funding for strengthening our family advocate plan, which is really a staff person to work with families to identify a plan and to help those families get to the resources. The miscellaneous income is cost shares. Our partners in the center get pro rata amount to share in the overall costs of running the center. And then we had grants, foundations and grants. Sorry, the 47,000 line also includes the cities of Thomas and Wilson. Foundations and grants, these are funds that are primarily program focused, so that, for example, we received a grant from for 7,000 from Boeing, Boeing Portland, at Employees Community Fund, and that was targeted specifically to do parent coaching. So those monies can't then be used towards the operation of the center. When you look at this, we had a deficit of $2,100. On the other hand, when you go to our financial statement, you can see our revenue fell significantly short of that amount. And what happened was the county cut about $30,000 in funding for that program I just talked about. So what we're trying to do always is project revenue with grants and that sort of thing. The program's targeted, and we make up the dollars whichever way we can. The Community Foundation has been, Community Chest has been an amazing resource, and they have actually increased the amount that they've given us. We have currently built into the budget, I forget what it was precisely. I think it was $15,000, and if you know the Community Chest, you will know that's a very optimistic grant request. I mean, everybody's challenged with finding funding. There are very few ways, to cut costs and maintain the center open. We actually have reduced this year's budget amount down from 76, which included program dollars, down to 43,000, because that's our estimate of what our revenue would be. What then happens, we have two ways to address that. We do have an employee over there. We try to, that person both starts the center while it's open, and then if we reduce hours, that person is then funded out of other programs for administrative data collection, organization from other funding streams. So that's how we carry it. Nonetheless, the center does cost us money to sustain, anywhere between 3,000 and 10,000, I'd estimate. And of our revenue, it's a little hard to say, but most of our revenue is from grants, which is specifically program funded, state contracts, which provide specific services, and relatively a small amount, particularly in the last couple of years, from individual donations, or what we call unrestricted dollars. And those unrestricted dollars are in many ways the lifeblood of the organization. They enable us to do some things which aren't funded, like support the center here. So I just thought you'd like some more detail on how we operate the center. You can see, I did want to just make one comment about that. I included the audited statement. It's the one that looks like this. And under there on revenue, the county, local, out of state lists an amount at $87.50. That's a January to June measure because we operate on a July to June fiscal year. So that includes half the amount from Washougal and half the amount from Emma's. So if you double that, it's around 17. So that's a little misleading. And then because we wanna, not, we're a statewide organization, and we really don't wanna show the rest of the state that we're losing more money on one of our centers. It's just as you said, we're like a business, we can't have a bottom line that's too far in deficit. So, we allocate some of the cost to Vancouver so that it doesn't look so bad. Otherwise, we'd be having the conversation about, you know, should we be here or not? So I hope that's generated some questions, because I'm not quite sure what information you would like and whether this sort of covers the territory or not. Good.
I have questions, but if you know them, feel free to answer, but they're probably more directed towards the administration. Just some things that I haven't been able to get answers to, and so I'm hoping, and please understand that we're asking these questions of every program, every agency. So
I don't have you.
just not you that we're picking on here. The first one is, we charge $1 per year for their rent of this building. Where is that in a contract of any kind? And is that a set number, or is that just a number we just always operated in?
We have an agreement that needs to be renewed with the society, and that number is stipulated in the agreement. I don't know the origins of the number, other than it was the infinitesimally small number to use, so that there was some kind of an amount there. We are restricted in the use of the building because of the funding that was used to do that. But there's nothing that we could find in that, Jennifer, regarding the lease terms. So the lease terms are at our discretion in terms of our agreement with them.
Okay.
But it is you know, some kind of a subsidy, if you would, that's in addition to the outright appropriation.
Right. Anything to add to that?
No, I do have a copy of the agreement.
That's the agreement there?
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Is it in our packets?
no, I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
think so.
Could we get a copy of that? The other thing is, why the children's home? Why not any other nonprofit? Why not other nonprofits in the same building? Why just one charity? Why not several? And so that's the other question I have.
So maybe I can't answer the last part of your questions, but the first part is, when the center first started, when the city pulled together the partners, the school district subsidized the coordinator position in the first years. And then it was taken over by the Unified Family Center, and they operated, and sometimes the funding came through the city, and sometimes it went from the city to the school district to the center, to staff the center. And they provided the balance of the services from the community Church of God, an amazing group of people. They were the ones who invited Children's Home Society to take over as lead agency. And it's a model that we use both here and in Battleground for a long time. So under the terms of the CDBG agreement, I believe, but anyway, it was part of our agreement, we couldn't rent space in the building. It could only go to other services serving low-income, at-risk families, and the costs of the building could be shared amongst the partner agencies. So currently, the CMAR Community Services Northwest and Columbia River Mental Health. And we actually have one more space room. The SNAP program was in there for a while. Partners have come and gone, and they do pay a portion, some portion of Renee's salary and the costs of things like photocopy. We put in actually 1.5 new phone systems in there, for instance, which, you know, are improvements that we make that don't So we knew the Unified Family Center and we had a history of doing it. And I think we're a little different from a lot of other agencies in that you sort of have two halves to our organization. One is quite a fee-for-service, Medicaid, children's mental health services. So it's a straight reimbursement. The other half of our organization down here is in family support. So it's sort of philosophically in tune with running a family center in that we tailor our services to family need. We also get funding. Some of our newer funding is more like the mental health services. It's evidence-based practice where we perform a service and we get reimbursed. But family support is hard to describe. It sounds fluffy when you talk about it because it really is tailored to the individual family. And, you know, we specialize in that, and there aren't many organizations. They usually have a much more limited scope of things they do. But the services here, you know, you see the tip of the iceberg, and it's connected to home visiting, parent education, and support groups, and services for mom and child, and things like that. So, you know, those all link up, but that little piece at the top is kind of an unusual service, and that's, I think, the only reason it's a Children's Home Society.
So, I mean, in the original contract, or in that we were engaged in this with the grant, I guess the grant's really the piece of this. In that grant, is the children's home stipulated, or is it just we have to provide these services? And
I don't believe that there's a specific naming in the grant. I don't think that they could do that, but they can specify the nature of the services. So you know, not having been here for all of that history, and we got some of that this evening and previously too, I think in the 2011 budget and the proposal that you saw from the administration, there's a long-standing or a standing relationship between the city and this organization, and the administration proposed to continue that. And just kind of where we're at with this, the appropriation was approved in the budget, so the dollars for the direct appropriation have been approved, and you recall a little earlier in the year we had the amendment or the update to the agreement with the agency that re-upped it for 2011, specified the new appropriation amount, but rolled the $1 lease. That was part of a packet that you had, and the council wanted some more information, I think, about the overall nature of their funding and their support, where that comes from, and what were the strings that were attached to the grant and the like. So this is that opportunity to hear that.
so as the lead agency, is there, I would take it you have bylaws then that govern what organizations can come under your umbrella? Is that right, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Broadly speaking,
Broadly.
it's nonprofit.
Right.
Nonprofit operations that provide services to at-risk families.
Okay.
But I should add, you know, that when the center opened, the city had an office in there for your planning department, I believe it was, or the city, anyway. So it doesn't preclude the city having an office in there, but I think we have always said not a for-profit operation, and we have space in there, and we allow other organizations to use the center, but not if they're making money.
Right, yeah. Now, what would happen, let's just hypothetically, we're in a real budget crisis on the state level. And I noticed a lot of your funding comes from the state. What happens if the state comes in with a big axe and cuts your spending severely? And let's.
Waiting to do.
Well, I'm just saying, let's say you guys
Absolutely.
make a decision, you've got to withdraw out of East County and take everything into Vancouver where the major population is. Where are we left with at that point? Is that where we have to go out and find another?
No, I mean, there are no state dollars in this after the cuts that were already made. Now, Vancouver, we're waiting to hear, and clearly the axe may fall any day. And if it does, I think there's a comparison with the family support budget on one of these pages somewhere. So our total budget around in Vancouver is around $426,000. When the state budget comes down, it could well cut $220,000 out of that. But not one of those dollars has anything to do with what you're. So some of those services are provided out here, but the funding for the staff for those services is not in the Wautuba budget. So I don't think there are any programs out here that I can think of. Some of Renee's extra time, it provides some supports for the kinship care program, which is under the Southwest Washington Area Agency on Aging and Disabilities. We've heard nothing about cuts to that, but that's a possibility, in which case the number of hours that she works might be cut. But the funding, we only charge you for the funding for the hours that the center's open, which is around 27, 28 hours a week. Now, 4 of those hours have, for the past 2 years, been funded as a pilot by the Community Chest that was concerned that we were not open over the lunch hour when lots of people would want to come in, so that we do extend it. And in fact, we're open a lot more time than we actually a focus would like that. But there's no guarantee that the hours of operation might not be adjusted, but the services don't change because it's not state funding.
Thank you.
Questions from other council members? Questions about the programs that they provide? Molly?
Just a comment. I know that when we first approached this topic, it was just a few weeks ago, I know Mayor Sonneson called me, and he had some input onto how the whole everything was, how this whole thing started. How the building became property of the city, and then how the Children's Home Society became the umbrella organization to oversee everything. So I mean, if it helps us clarify everything, I can certainly call Les and ask him to come in and maybe speak to us about how it started. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will continue to do things in the way we've always done them, but it gives us some perspective in the thinking of, where we acquired the building and the support to begin with. So
It was a very innovative concept at the time. It's a very efficient way to operate in some ways. And I think it's telling, thinking of your wellness, it's probably telling that Camas has continued its support at a reduced level. We sort of understand that. And Lloyd Bonsfian says, gotta cut you, yeah. But I do think it says something about the community. It's a very efficient way to help the community somehow. If you think 7,500 is what this year's amount, and it is a challenge, particularly when fire and police are being asked to give up various things. It's a large amount, but in return, you get a $60,000 operation, and you give $50,000 away to really needy members of the community. So, but tough choices. It's not a fun time to be in social services or politics.
yeah.
Any other questions from council? Bridget, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time at the end of the
No,
day and
it's
helping us get more up to speed.
And I will say that paying for the space is really hard. So if that's,
Understood.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Phillips, good evening. Come on up. You're the next contestant.
Do I win the prize?
I was gonna ask you. So, yeah, I'm Bart Phillips, and I'm president of the Columbia River Economic Development Council. I think it's the first time I've addressed the council in my 10 years here. So, first, thank you for your support this year. I see you have a copy of our work plan, and we're visually implementing that plan as we speak for your benefit. But I'm actually here and asked to be on your agenda to talk about the countywide economic development strategic planning process that's underway, and you may have seen a bit about that in the paper. You're a participant, and I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that. I've handed out a sort of a frequently asked questions paper to answer any other questions after I leave about this process. But in about 5 minutes, let me sort of give you a quick rundown of this process and where we're at. First, the genesis of this was a countywide leadership summit that we held in, I believe, April of last year. And I believe Mayor Gard was a participant in that, where we asked every lead elected official from around the county and their chief administrative officer to come to a meeting with every one of my past board of directors from the last 25 years, of which we had 23 that are still with us in this community. And it was really to ask about the county's strategy for economic development and how they thought we were doing and what sort of plan we had. Walked away with 2 clear messages. First was a little startling to me, and there was felt, I think unanimously, that there wasn't a unified countywide economic development strategic plan. At least one that communities felt they had ownership to. I think everyone agreed that the EDC had its plan, and we were very focused on executing on it and doing a good job at that, but there wasn't one that the communities felt they had any ownership in, or a plan that they thought spoke to their specific needs. That was pretty startling for someone who'd been sitting there pretty focused on economic development for over 10 years in the community. But there wasn't a plan that folks felt that they were bought into. So we walked away with 2 goals. One was to correct that situation. But let me back up. There was another sort of aha that I had, I think, actually in October of 2008. I became pretty convinced that if the EDC, my organization, our organization, was still acting on the same plan that we had in 2008 going into the recession as going out of the recession, that the community was going to be way off the mark. I think there have been some major structural changes in the local economy that have been masked by what we think this recession is all about, that being a burst in the housing bubble and basically freeze up in credit. I think there's some other critical structural changes that are going that are sort of masked. So with those 2 sort of predicates, we did move forward with starting a countywide, with a process of developing a new countywide strategic plan. We convened a steering committee of which you're a new city manager. David Scott sits on representing you, as well as 15 other individuals, including both every jurisdiction in the county, the ports, all the ports, and including my board of directors representation there. We convened that panel. We also, working on this process, determined that we needed some outside consultants and guidance, that basically if we were to put together a plan based upon our knowledge set, that again, we wouldn't have the intelligence that someone from the outside and perspective might be able to offer. We did then look for a consultant with both a national as well as global practice, and selected a firm called Tip Strategies out of Austin, Texas, to support us. And that this process was not necessarily funded by our organization. We would then approach the Board of County Commissioners and secured funding from them, actually from retained earnings from the Industrial Revenue Bond Corporation. We've been managing that corporation on behalf of the county now for well over 20 years, and we have been basically retaining earnings in that corporation from that point in time. And we approached the board and convinced them that it was a good place to take those earnings and to invest it in this process. So the Board of County Commissioners is financing this effort to the tune of around $80,000 to be able to bring these consultants in. We secured the consultants They've been on board since December. They've made now 2 site visits. They were here last week again. In December, they basically met with the steering committee, and we sort of scoped the project. They identified the work program that will bring us to completion in May of this year. As I said, they were here last week, meeting for 2 days with focus groups. We met with people from various targeted industries, of which we had interest in, and getting feedback, manufacturing, professional services. We held a focus group with human resource managers. We held a focus group, which I found to be the most fun, and that was, we held a focus group with young professionals. Basically, your ticket to get invited to this focus group is you had to be in a professional, and you had to be under the age of 40. I wasn't on that list, but I still got to sit in. We really wanted to find out from them, I mean, how is this community about being able to attract young professionals, because talent is really going to be the name of the game going forward and being competitive. Then we also held another interesting focus group, another one I didn't attend. We went over to Portland and met with the private businesses who were involved in economic development there. Greenlight Greater Portland, the regional partners, Portland Business Alliance. We also met with practitioners, the Portland Development Commission, and also this chief executive officer of the regional partners. We wanted to know how the Portland area felt about us as a business location, so that we knew what really kind of the competitive environment was here in the Portland metro area. I've seen some briefing notes that came out of that meeting. It's rather fascinating, their take on us. And it's actually pretty fascinating on what our own take on us is in the Portland metro area is also. We've gathered that information. So what's next? The consultants will bring to us their sort of analysis of where we are in the global marketplace here probably towards the end of February. That will be the next meeting of the steering committee. Their next job is to take that and identify lists of targeted industries and strategies to basically recruit or grow those industries in the county. And then that'll be probably due here in April. Then in May, a complete strategic plan will be delivered to us. So how does that speak to Camas and Washougal? So we kind of view and especially your new joint economic development effort. I think the alignment's going to be perfect for where you are in putting that process together. One, we are going to be able to identify what we believe countywide targets of opportunity are going to be in terms of business growth and development, including targeted industries. The second thing the consultant's going to bring to us are what we consider to be sort of game-changing initiatives. It's all well and good. Everyone does targeted industries. Everyone does recruitment. It's not really that difficult. But these sort of game-changing initiatives in which we can sort of establish a new competitive advantage for this region, I'm really looking forward to. I don't have any inclination of what these are going to be or what the consultants can propose, but I think it's going to be instructive for things that this community can do, especially with the new economic development. And lastly, what we've asked the consultant to do for us collectively is sort of a new platform for how economic development should be structured throughout the county, and what sort of communications platform needs to be in place so that all the entities who are involved in economic development, from the ports to your new entity, mine, and the state and others, can continue to collaborate in economic development going forward. I think the timing of this work is just perfect. The economy is definitely recovering. I hope you're feeling some of it out here. Businesses are highly profitable. There's a lot of retained earnings, and there's some companies starting to make some steps now because they're feeling comfortable with the recovery. So I think that this plan's timing being released in May, and I hope I could come out here again and discuss that with you then. It would be perfect, especially and also in alignment with your new economic development. So with that, I'd answer any questions about the strategy and how it relates out here.
Trev?
TIP Strategies, have they done work for anyone else in the Pacific Northwest or cities?
They, TIP, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. TIP, one of the reasons we selected, not only did they have a national practice and a global practice, they also did site location consulting, both on a national and a global basis, so they got that too. But what gives me comfort with them is the managing director, John Roberts, was formerly head of business development for the state of Washington back in the 90s, and I knew him then and worked with him. He went with Governor, was attracted down to Texas with Governor Ann Richards when she took office. She did economic development for the state of Texas. John comes from the Portland area. He actually owns a bicycle shop over in Portland. Who doesn't? But he was also the first CEO of LifePort, which was a company up in Woodland. So he knows this area. And I guess what he has just also finished an engagement with Powell. He's done like 3 other projects in the state. So national, global outlook, knows the Northwest, but he's also afraid not to tell us that we're doing things wrong too. So I think we got the complete package.
It's just, I'm sure you've heard this from almost every municipality, but my question would be, as players in CREDC, how is it that we would have possibly an advantage or over any other municipality if there's an interest, you know, from an outside firm in coming to Clark County? Like, we want them, of course, to come to Washougal or to the port or somewhere that's gonna impact our revenue. So how is it that you could promise us that would have come to Washougal instead of, say, Ridgefield or Battleground or La Center? I mean, because your task is to kind of bring it to the county as a whole.
Well, when I was in Ridgefield last week, I told him I promised Ridgefield. When I'm here, I promised Washougal. I just hope that never gets in the press. But no, it's a good question. We try to be an honest broker of the county as a site and what locations. And I could give you my site location 101, and I should sometime. I could sort of walk you through the steps of the site location process. But you know, basically, when companies are doing site searches, they're looking first at the region and shortlisting the region, or the region from the Pacific Northwest, the state, the community, and think of that as the county, and then down to the site. Rarely do companies come to us and say, I want to see a site in XYZ community. Rarely have they shortlisted that. So during probably about 90% of the site location process, we're dealing with the entire county, trying to sell the county as a location. And then after that process, then we're looking, actually, we're not necessarily looking at communities now either, we're looking at sites. So it really comes down, does your community have a site, and how competitive are you for that? So it's all about being shovel-ready in today's market. It's got to be, if you don't have a building, you've got to have a shovel-ready site. And frankly, you need to know that your communities here in the east side are shortlisted frequently because of the port. They have one of the few greenfield industrial sites in the county, and one of the few that can take heavy manufacturing, and few that has rail. So you've been on many short lists. The one thing I can say, and this is no knock against the port, but that property out there still does not have an approved site plan. So when we tell a client that it's shovel-ready and we're ready to rock and roll, we're having to do that with a nod and a wink. Because we know that if they say yes to us, we're really going to have to lean on the permitting authorities to get that thing expedited. And David can tell you from his past life that I'm never shy about doing that. But especially with that property out there, until you get all the contingencies off of it, we're a little bit, we're not as competitive as we could be. But with that greenfield site and the infrastructure to it, you're almost on any short list that's involved in manufacturing and distribution. Absolutely.
At what point do you bring in local authorities into the process? If you've got 2 sites, for example, one in Ridgefield, one here, do you bring in the Ridgefield and the Washougal folks to talk to these people?
It's usually right during the very end of the process, and it's usually about the time that the company's about ready to make their decision. As this is going to sound difficult, but the process is very cut and dry. It's almost like calculus. It's not as political or relationship based as it used to be. And many times we are And oftentimes, economic development councils in communities such as yourselves are disintermediated out of the process now by the internet. And we're almost, to be able to play the recruitment game, we're almost having to feed the web more than we are feeding the client. Oftentimes, when projects are showing up on our doorstep, we've already been shortlisted down to the county area. All the information has been done online, and if we're not feeding it there. But to get back to your question, is that if the local jurisdictions are being involved, it's either in the very beginning or the very end. It's not during the middle. Peace Help.
If we have a chance to interface directly with these people, we can sell our own
Absolutely.
community.
So a good example of how we did that, Peace Health. Peace Health is our client, has been for 4 years, and you've seen where that project is coming to a conclusion here shortly, very positively. Great project for the region. It's going to be 700 plus jobs. But we met we did the site location early on with the site location out of a consultant out of Phoenix, who didn't think we knew who the prospect was. Being managed out of Phoenix for a company based in Bellevue. But we did bring the elected officials in during the first CEO level visit, which was 2.5 years ago, where they came in, and we had 3 different sites that they were interested in. We'd already been shortlisted by the folks in Phoenix. It was Camas and Vancouver, and we had the chief elected officials in for sort of a meet and greet dinner the night before with the CEO. And then we went through the site location process where they've now narrowed it down to Vancouver. Because they found that they haven't named the facility yet, but it will be in Vancouver. So we do bring in. A lot less frequently than we used to, because the nature of the game has changed quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I know we're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes on the actual professional services agreement with CRDC,
Okay.
but I think Bart is correct. It's I believe great time for us, both in joining with CRDC and our own local development efforts. Truly, it's up to us to make sure that as those inquiries come into CREDC, that we're in the game somehow and making sure that we've got a seat at the table and the ability to do that. We probably could have still done that without making a financial investment to CREDC, but at the same time, it wouldn't, at least from my standpoint, it would not have felt good whatsoever to do that. But for Bart's staff to have the eventual link to the staff that we'll have here in the East County area, it's just an ideal world for both of you mining at the same time and be able to bring those things about. So from our side, I think it's going to be a wonderful relationship.
So do you want me to stay for the continuing conversation?
Sure. I think we've got some park updates, and then we'll be right to that. Paul?
I've just got one more question. I mean, suppose you had a magic wand and you could create a site that was not only shovel-ready but had, what would the site look like that you're seeing the most demand for, that you could put somebody into quickly? How big is it? What do you need in terms of power, water, sewer, transportation?
So, and I could actually give you, we do keep a matrix of what our inquiries look like and what the demands are. So there's really 2 that are unmet in this community. Well, there's one that's totally unmet, and it'll never be created, and that's for the large facility over 100,000 square feet that happens to be vacant. Don't have it, it's not going to be created. The development community is not going to build a spec facility that is vacant. A lot of demand for that. We could be actually attracting a lot of businesses if we had it. But that's not going to happen. I think we can build one pretty quick. The second is basically going to be what we call Tech Flex, and you do have some of that. Your port calls it incubator space, but these are small, flexible facilities. The building may be large, but they can be demised between 10 and 20,000 feet, or take down, up to 75,000 if that's how big the building is. A perfect example is the Anderson Construction Barberton facility up in the Barberton area. It's on the Chalachi Prairie Railroad. You see a lot of that in the 112th Avenue corridor there around SEH, so that's a little bit older, but, you know, that's the type of real highly flexible space. And the private sector will build some of that space because I think when the market gets a little bit better, I think that is the best foundation for success if you need to build.
How about greenfields? How big do they need to be?
Need to be a little bit bigger because you're talking about a larger user. We're looking for a greenfield user as we speak right now, probably 25 acres and up. Because you're usually looking at an owner-occupied facility. You're not looking, you're not going to find a speculative developer building greenfields. So you're looking for something larger. You're going to have more patience. You target that type of end user. Not a lot of that in the marketplace right now, people looking. So, you know, it's really whether you want to hit singles or hit home runs. I actually play for singles and doubles, and then if we hit a home run like the Peace Health, you know, it's just great, but we're not planning for that.
No, I was just trying to think more in terms of infrastructure development, which does have time horizons of decades.
I think that before you start building things that need large amounts of water, large amounts of electricity, you need to understand going forward, electricity is going to become more expensive. We're going to lose our competitive advantage for large electrical users. So I don't think you need to really build out that real big. Water, high energy, high water go hand in hand. I'm not sure that's a competitive advantage.
Are you guys doing any lobbying on giving local governments, county governments, more power in economic development and luring economic development in?
Well, we've always been real strong about trying to see about incentives. The nut we have to crack in the state of Washington is, of course, the lending of the state's credit. We are active around the new TIF legislation. We'll be signing on to a new coalition to try to get an enhanced TIF program. So we do work around targeted incentives. We did both 2 for semiconductors and 1 for semiconductor materials. Interestingly enough, TIP may be bringing some of those to us and saying this is what we need. They come from an environment where cities have the tax incentives, not the state. It's been very effective in Texas and others. It's about sales tax. You're willing to raise your sales tax to do economic development. Didn't say that for the press, so please. But I mean, so in other communities, it's at the local level, not the state. And that may be something we really want to think about. And some other ideas like that may come out of the strategy. Revenue sharing. We talk about, you know, what have you brought and done for me lately? We shared in the revenue for regional economic development. Do we care what community it's in? That's been brokered before. In a time of no activity, it may be the time to do the deal. So that may address the question you asked. So TIP's going to bring us some things that hopefully are going to challenge us.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Suzanne, you've got a compliment for us.
Yeah, and that's the reason why your packet is so big, so I apologize for that. This is an update to the Parks Comprehensive Plan. And what we did originally is we revisited the old survey that MIG created back in 2005. We just updated that with current information, basically just used it as a format. And we sent that out to all the residents for their feedback. Each postal box in the city of Washougal received a survey. So we didn't really get as good of responses if we would have called each individual resident, but we got enough to base our survey on to update our information. So, and the results were basically the same as from 2005 on the needs that people see for the community and what they want. So we basically just updated the information inside the comp plan to reflect that side by side with the 2005 information. The whole document, we just went over and updated all the language, cleaned it up. There was some grammatical errors that we spent a lot of time on.
We updated all the parks, the information inside the parks. We added new parks, corrected names. It's basically just a total overhaul of the system. There's some chapters that we didn't touch at all, other than some grammatical. So I don't know if you have some questions that you want to speak about specifically, or I can go over chapter by chapter the major changes that we've done. So it's kind of up to you. I have a summary of that. I can just walk it through. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay, so basically, the first chapter is credits, so there was, just changes in names. Chapter 2, we delineated between the natural parks and the open space, so the definition of per park and undeveloped open spaces that are left after residential development goes in, so that we own several undeveloped HOA land or wetlands, that type of thing. So we just made that definition a little clearer. We took the reference to school district facilities. We clarified that a little bit because we can't really rely on school district properties, playgrounds, that sort of thing for our park planning, because those facilities are not always open and available for the citizens. This is the chapter 2, where we dovetailed our current survey into the 2005 information. We updated the information on the sports field usage, the leagues that we have available in our community, so we updated that. And then some minor changes to the park classifications. Chapter 3 was all grammatical corrections, nothing else. Chapter 4, clarification of, there's an example of Edmonds as being used as a financial budget revenue. We just kind of clarified, it's a much different size, scope city, but we added a clarification to that. We also clarified the conditions under which we would accept private land, such as HOA land, the type of properties that we're looking for, basically for trail development or underserved areas in the community. We also talked in this chapter about how the cemetery operations dovetail into the parks operations, and I think that may be clarified in this year's budget as we've made some improvements to the 2011 cemetery budget. So that's, as park plans or any other plans go, it's already obsolete language, so as soon as you approve it, has some old language in it. Chapter 5, that's the chapter with all the parks, the definitions, all the information on where they are, each individual park. So we just updated those, added in proposed services that we could have at those particular parks. We updated the organization of the park classification to match how we operate inside the city. So there was some information in the old 2005 plan that wasn't quite intimate to our town, so we really chose to focus on making it a plan that was that we could work with instead of having something that somebody else created for us. So we redefined language regarding parklands owned by other jurisdictions, which are immediately adjacent to Washougal residents. There's some mix-up on names. Apologize for my voice, I'm starting to lose it apparently. And some of these facilities by the original MIG, the comp planners that we had before. We added some language for RV inside the city. We do have a restriction right now on where we can place RV, and that's in, I think, highway commercial is the only place, but there is some flexibility in the downtown district, so we looked at a little bit at that. We updated the community garden language. We refined the indoor recreation center language because the residents in both 2005 and 2010 expressed that was really an important piece, that they all want to see that in a swimming pool. So we did a lot of refining of the off-street trail system language. Particularly, we had some systems that were named in the plan, but they're not common to what we refer to them. So we made some corrections on naming, on where they, where they are in the city. And we also have some that have developed since then, so we added those in as well. We also added some language on the Washougal River Trail, a water trail. And we recognize some of the concerns in the recent, the Planning Commission about trails on private property. So we looked really hard at that in those areas that are of concern. So trying to stick to off-trail systems without too much sidewalk, that's a transportation discussion. Off-street trails are a parks function. So we looked at the connections between our existing trail systems and some of the more regional trail systems, such as the Steigerwald National Wildlife. And let's see, trying to speed read here. So yeah, the off-street trail system seemed to be a big topic that we covered. And Chapter 6, we did some bigger changes in that too. We also moved the Park District language from Chapter 6 to the appendix. We updated all the costs that are in charts in Chapter 6 regarding development, acquisition, to meet the goals of the Parks Department. We updated those. We shifted things around because we actually made some purchases. We did some development, so those things are obsolete, so we switched them around a little bit. And then we had some assistance from the finance department in creating more realistic parks budgeting scenarios based on strong to weak or weak to strong revenue growth and city support. So it's a little bit more realistic for us to look at development of our projects based on revenue. It was pretty out there. Of course, that was during a time that we had, it was a little bit more optimistic financially. So it was too extreme. So we brought that down, dialed it into more current financial realities, and that's it.
So one thing we might want to highlight, you talked, Suzanne, about the fact that you spent quite a lot of time on the trail system. One thing the council needs to be aware of, that this plan has the unanimous recommendation from your Parks Board. And it had a unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission because it falls under the umbrella of your comprehensive plan. However, the Planning Commission made some tweaks to what the Parks group had presented. And all of them were accommodated and updated. The Parks Board looked at what the Planning Commission wanted to see and endorsed all of those changes except for one. And so when you are adopting this plan, after your hearing, you get to decide between two competing interests and recommendations from advisory groups to you. They are not consistent on this one item. And that is, should the name of the trail, the Washougal River Trail, is that proposed trail? Is that what we call it?
North side of the river, right?
In the north, yeah. So on the north side of the river, there's a couple neighborhoods there. And as you can imagine, with public trails, there's competing interest around the general public good, around access, particularly water access. And we all recognize the advantage that brings to a community and what that can do for all of us. And I think we all would point to that as a real benefit. The competing interest in the balance is around private property and privacy. And your planning commission is recommending that in a specific area, maybe Suzanne could point to it on the map. Or point to it on the big map, but Trevor,
Yeah, so it's referenced as Pearl Terrace or White River Estates. Right here is the open space below the old George Schmidt Yard, west of 32nd Street. west side of the river. This is Turtle Terrace and White River Estates.
So on that corner there, that curve of the river, as you can see on Exhibit B that shows the trail system, you can see the dotted line around proposed trail. The Parks group continues to advocate for unanimously for water access for those trails, and that the trails stay on the water for the entire length. Your Planning Commission is recommending that in that particular area, that developed area, that the trail come off the water into the neighborhood, on the sidewalk, and then back to the water after it's gone through the neighborhood. So that is the difference between the two recommendations, and the recommendation of your staff is to have a water trail. And in the staff report, which I need to find quickly here, the staff is recommending that the park board's approach to this be that which is adopted by the council.
Can you tell me that one more time, please?
The staff's recommendation is that what the Parks Board is advocating for be what the council adopts, and that is to keep the trail on the water. And there's a number of bullets on page 2 of your staff report that walk you through why that is our recommendation.
What page is
It is the
Exhibit A, isn't it?
back at the very beginning, this one?
Yeah, it's backside of the
Agenda bill.
Yeah,
Staff
right.
Staff recommendations halfway down.
There's no page number.
Yeah, backside of the agenda bill cover.
You see the staff recommendation, you see some bullets. You also see at the top of that, when you read through this agenda bill, you'll get the background that I'm explaining here about the timing with everything. There's been some, basically the first bullet is saying there's been some work that's been undertaken already by the city to obtain easements or dedications. And so we've begun, as you can imagine, it's a piecemeal approach to getting a trail, to being able to have that kind of continuity. And so some of that work has already happened. We don't actively pursue easements or dedications from property that isn't undertaking development, but when the development comes through, then that's when we try to do that. Another thing that's pretty important is if a trail or any other facility, frankly, is not on our Parks CFP, when a property develops and they provide through dedication or easement that facility to the city, they can't get credit against their park impact fees. So if it's a residential development, it's great for them to be able to dedicate or to provide easement to the city for, say, a trail facility, and then we can credit them against their park impact fees, and it's advantageous to the project. So it needs to be on the plan in order for that to happen. There's a broader notion that you know, we're kind of in the mix countywide as part of a broader trail package, and this piece of it is important to that. That's our recommendation to you and your parks group, that be there. And can you remind me, Suzanne, the updated CFP as proposed by the Planning Commission makes that change, and so that's what's in front of the council. And so what we would be asking you to do after your hearing is actually to put it back in. Is that the mechanics of it?
The trail system?
Yeah, that piece, yes. So the Planning Commission's recommendation is taking it out of the CFP. Parks Board is not agreeing with that, and the staff also is asking that you put it back in. And then just procedurally, the staff's also recommending that if you concur with the Planning Commission, that you send it back to the Planning Commission, because the public hearing that they had and the public deliberation, if you would, around this issue was advertised with the trail where it was. This would be substantive enough new information that our recommendation would be that it get vetted publicly again through the Planning Commission. Whereas if you concur with your Parks group, then you wouldn't need to do that necessarily because it was already vetted publicly. And of course, you'll have your own hearing on that issue as well. So unfortunately, we would always like to be able to bring you an updated facilities plan where all of your advisory groups and your staff are of one mind. And that's certainly our goal, is to work the process the best we can, find that sweet spot that there can be consensus in the advice that's being brought to you. This is one of those circumstances where that evaded us, and the council will need to make a decision as to what to do. And when we come back and you have your public hearing, there'll certainly be much more specific information, and I'm sure that you'll hear testimony on both sides of that issue to help you in your own decision making on that.
Dave, did you have a question?
Just a comment, the concern that the plan raises, well, first of all, great job. A lot of detail. The concern that the plan raises for me is that very early in the plan, you talk about expanding to meet the needs of growth and population growth, geographic growth, and that sort of thing. And my concern there is that we're relying on volunteer efforts now to maintain some of these park spaces we've recently acquired. And we've got agreements with other people to involve volunteers to maintain ball fields and things like that, based on a lack of money to do the job ourselves. The other thing is we've got facilities which are not being maintained and which possibly pose liability for injury to the using public. And under those circumstances, I'm very concerned about putting out a plan that says, let's expand. So I would like to sit down with you and go over my concerns line by line. It probably won't take more than 30 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to recognize the hard work of the Parks Board and the Planning Commission. You know, I mean, even though there is a difference of opinion in one minor, what I consider a small area, because realistically, we're not looking at something that's imminent. But when you talk about a trail system, we're talking about the prospect of something that might happen over the next 20 or 25 years, realistically. But I was liaison to the Parks Board when MIG was around. They did the first comprehensive plan for the Parks Board. That was at substantial expense to the city, and we do have to have it in order to get grants and funding from outside organizations. It is a criteria. We had some wonderful plans from MIG. They were really marvelous. Hathaway Park, totally unaffordable. But so I really appreciate the staff and the Parks Board for kind of going as required to update the comprehensive plan internally and in-house and doing all of that labor. And I would have to say, with regard to the issue of the trail system, I think, as I said before, this is not a mandate. We're not going to go out next year and start eminent domain, or we're not going to take over pieces of property to build a trail. This is just, if you look at the whole comprehensive package, it's kind of where we vision our trail system and our park system is going to be in the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 15, maybe 20. But we do have to have that plan intact. And I know there were a number of things that were included in this comprehensive plan in the hopes that there might be some funding available from other agencies, both state government, nonprofit, for-profit, private sector, that we might be able to obtain to achieve some of the goals that I know the Parks Board would like to see, so. And I think it would benefit the city. If you look at what citizens want in some of the surveys, it comes back over and over again. Walkability, more trails, more open spaces, and those are the things I think that we're trying to achieve in this.
Suzanne, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
And we just took care of a agenda item at the same time, so that's okay.
Well, then we'll have to get the approval of the
Absolutely.
Exactly.
None of us
You've
will
got a
ever
PSA
forget that,
coming to
will we?
us.
We'll never forget that.
Yes, there'll be a professional services agreement with CREDC, as we heard Bart's presentation earlier. As you recall, in your 2011 budget, you made appropriation for a Washougal contribution to our county EDC. And the way that we execute that is through a professional services agreement with the EDC. So we will be before you at your next regular meeting with that, probably on the consent agenda, to authorize the mayor to sign that agreement, and then that is essentially the mechanism for your appropriation to be spent to the EDC.
Any questions on that item from council?
Oh, I just had a comment on the letter that was sent. Said that they were sending us the services agreement between the city of Camas and the Columbia River Economic Development Council, so I'm glad they sent the right one. That was
Cut
in
and
the letter.
paste, yeah,
Yeah.
cut and paste thing going on, yeah.
Okay.
I guess I keep going here. huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Go.
Dave's also gonna stand in for Joanne
I'm
this
covering
evening.
for Jimmy.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna step out and just, I have coffee going if anybody wants. So,
On
coffee
day.
night.
It's good.
Sounds good, John. Please, yeah, I will. Yeah.
The next item is
Where are we?
item B1. So it's very close to the front of your packet, right after the letter that you were just referencing. Joanne spoke about this before at a previous work session or a hearing where we were talking about the annexation, that our language in the code is basically out of date. It's decades old, needs to be updated. It's been updated in some of our other documents in the statute. So this is really a housekeeping code change. There's the need to have a hearing. And so at your next meeting, we'll be in front of you asking you to set a public hearing, and then we'll have that hearing to make those housekeeping changes. So that's that one. If you have any specific questions on that language, let me know, or Joanne, and we'd be happy to walk you through that, but it's a housekeeping type item. And the next one, item B2, council's also had discussion about this. This was one piece of the sign code update that has to do with fees and isn't part of the land use or zoning code, and that was to reduce the permit fee for a temporary sign from the current fee of $80, which is applicable to all signs, to a reduced fee of $25. And I recall council giving favorable feedback to Joanne at in some previous conversations. So thank you for that. And again, that is to set a hearing so that you can take testimony on that. We'll have that in front of you at your next meeting. My apologies, but we did B3 under 4C previously, so we'll be asking you to set a public hearing on the CFP. We don't have a date specifically set for that yet. This is one of those items where next week we won't be asking you to set the hearing. But we've given you the presentation and the update, and so you could expect sometime in the near future to see a set hearing item on your consent agenda. We'll give you some email update on that so that it refreshes your memory for that.
So the presentation we had from the Parks Board is simply just a preparation for something that's going to happen long down in the future. We're not going to have any discussion about the two options, or are we going to have any discussion next week about the two options?
We weren't planning to have that on the agenda next week. If we were, it would have been just to set the hearing. We could certainly informally have conversation about to this evening, if you'd like, about the issues around the trail, although we've lost our parks person, but we could still do that.
Just two comments on the trail. The first one is, nobody wants to follow a trail through a housing area. They want to follow the trail along the river. Second one is, and that's what the public's looking for. Second one is, if you look at on the internet, you'll find all kinds of studies, mainly in England and in the U.S., about how these trails bring crime into housing areas. And running it through the housing area is a quick way to do that. Keep it out on the river.
I would submit to you, though, Councilman Shoemaker, that this trail that they're proposing, if I'm correct, you're using the back end of everyone's property that's up against the river. So this is going through people's property, their backyard. So if you'd rather take the criminals off the streets and put them in your backyard, I mean, I guess that's your call, but.
If you run them through the streets, they've got the streets to get there, and they can use automobiles.
Yeah, street lights, though.
Bicycles or walking.
I live in that neighborhood. A river trail would be 250 feet or so from the back of my house. If it's on the street, it's 25 feet from my front door. Not only that, as Councilmember Shoemaker points out, if they can arrive in a motorized division, that's one thing, but when's the last time you saw someone carrying an HD TV down a trail?
Too much work.
My own view, and I certainly won't make any friends in my own neighborhood, is that the Streamside Trail, at least in the immediate White River neighborhood, makes more sense. I think once you get down below, certainly below Washougal River Road, the topography is such that it gets real difficult to run along the stream. The one place that trail would be closer to people's backyards is on North L Drive, which is the place that floods all of the time. And given that we have had water several feet deep in that whole floodway area, right up to 35 or 40 feet from the back door, I would think that under state law, that qualifies as being between the mean high water lines, which means under the Navigable Rivers Act, it's public access anyway.
Yeah, and I want to just add to what you're saying. I'm not at all saying that having a trail in the backyard would be great. I know if I lived there, I wouldn't want anyone walking through my backyard. And it's my property, and I just, my access to the river, my access to my recreation to the river, I just don't want people walking through my backyard. And I should have that right to say that.
The topography back there is such that you have the river with a cobble bank, and then you come back into the blackberries 10 or 15, maybe 20 feet, and then you have an old riverbank which is another 3 or 4 or 5 feet high, and then you have another dozen feet of blackberries. The separation from my back door to where that trail would go is significant because of, A, the topography, and B, that you've got the trees and the blackberries and everything else there separating the two.
Yeah, I'm not, my issue's really not the crime issue, because the way it's set up, the people who live in the neighborhood are gonna be the ones that probably use it. It's just the fact of not wanting someone to walk through my backyard and to invade my privacy, so.
Yeah, and there are certainly some of those questions. that
Well,
we
the
have.
other-
That's right.
just one more thing to add is because it is floodway, it is illegal for me to build a permanent structure there. I can't even plant trees out there. So I can plant trees along that vegetation buffer, but within the grassy area, that has to be kept open. A lot of my neighbors are probably, to be kind, skirting the law on that. I'm not, obviously, but.
Molly?
I would just like to say that, I mean, we're not talking about something that is imminent.
Right.
We're talking about a philosophy, you know, and an idea that we have. If we've been around for a few years, we know that we have run like smack dab just into this discussion before. And it was a very controversial discussion. And frankly, I think it's a discussion that we need to open up as a community. And like to open it up to the people in that neighborhood and say, what really are your concerns? And then explore some of those concerns and say, are they really, you know, are they really valid? Because I honestly, in my neighborhood, behind my house, there's an easement. And the city could come in and say, I mean, I think intentionally, it was originally for utility, for sewer or something like that. I don't think the city will ever use it, but there is a 15-foot easement. And frankly, if the city were to come in and say, we're gonna put a trail through your backyard, I would probably have some concerns about that. And so in some ways, I can understand the residents of that neighborhood. But at this point in time, it's still a philosophical discussion, and I think it is an important one, is do we want to be able to have a trail system along a very beautiful and very unique and frankly, in our region, a wild river that is, you know, there's not very many of them around anymore. Do we want to have that ability? And then what are we going to have to trade off to get that? And are the, you know, is there a way, maybe in 20 years, that we could have that, or is it not a reality? Maybe the private citizens will dominate on this discussion. I think it's an important discussion to have.
Yeah.
John, I wanted to understand your concern. The way I read the map, and maybe I didn't get it right, those properties stop substantially short of the river. So they wouldn't be going through your backyard. They could be going behind your property, as I understand it. Did I misread that?
No, what Paul had said was accurate. Within a certain area of both sides of the navigable river, the government does own it technically. Like my backyard, the railroad actually owns technically up to my back porch. But, you know, I still have a shed that's on that property. I still have, you know, those kind of things. You know, so, yeah, technically that's, you know, what Paul said is true. But most of the time, the government never does anything with that other than to keep it clean and keep it flowing. And you don't ever have to worry about anyone back there unless they're going on the river. And so for me, it would just be more of a privacy thing. I keep, you know, my privacy in the things that I do, you know, with my family and my backyards, and I just, you know, when I buy property, I buy it for the privacy aspect. I don't.
Okay, I understand the concern now.
Just one other thing to say about that. Just upstream from my house, there is on the south side of the river, there's a tree with an old tire swing that everybody who's lived here knows about. Also, right, the reason it's there is because there's a deep pool. And during salmon season, there'll be 50 people there fishing. And some portion of them will slip between the houses to get there. We have a force main sewer easement at the, kind of at the end of M Street. And if there were a trail, then people could get from M Street to that fishing hole, which in some ways, that's the point in time right now when that part of the river is most heavily used. And that would take some pressure off the local residents.
And I guess my decision on this, Mayor and Council, my decision on how I would vote on this would really be based on the response from the citizens who live there. I don't live there. And for me to make a decision based on what I want or what I perceive isn't, I don't think, a good solution to that for myself. So I'll be going off of what the response of the citizens there. If they're in favor, if it's 50-50, then that'll be another subject.
I just have a concern regarding the property owners. When they purchased their property, was it riverfront property? Was it sold as riverfront property?
I don't think anybody here can answer that question.
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
What about when you bought yours?
I knew that I had river access. I wouldn't have called it riverfront. I mean, I can, from my master bedroom deck, I can see the river, but only little pieces of it. It's certainly not at all like it was when I was in 12th and K and the river was in my backyard.
That's true.
I could go out on my deck and look down and see the fish. That's not the situation at all. From the deck there, you're 275 feet from almost 100 yards from the water.
I can provide one piece of information, and I'm just trying to remember what Joanne mentioned to us earlier today, Trevor, and that is that this concept of a trail in this area is not new.
There's some history there.
Yeah.
And that there are some documents that exist, some maps and documents that exist that kind of have the dotted line there.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's an easement across the properties. That doesn't mean that there's anything like that. It's just to say that that notion has been out there.
Right.
That information may or may not have been available to the current property owners when they were purchasing, because it's not necessarily something that's in a title report. Conceptual. It's conceptual.
My title insurance policy does include an exception for the mean high water problem.
Might be interesting, Dave, for the public hearing, as it gets to council or any of the other bodies, to maybe have those final plats brought forward as well, to see if there's any notes on there or anything else that may have been put into there.
So,
when we get to that point, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's been too many places that they've already fought this for,
Yeah.
people living on the river.
I just want to say that, just as an aside, we had some history on council here with some incendiary and I mean, they, for example, they made some very serious accusations against Nabil Shahwa personally, which I knew to be false. The two people who were most engaged in that, the colonel has passed away, and the
Tom.
shaved head guy has moved to Skamania, actually to North Bonneville.
He has?
Yes.
Huh.
So, we obviously have some more discussion to have about this. My big question is, if we're not going to see it as setting a public hearing next week, what really is the next step for this agenda bill?
The next step, go ahead.
No, to request to set the public hearing.
Right.
So we'd have basically a 3-week lag. We'll bring it back to workshop for you to request to set the public hearing.
Okay.
Or be able to compile some more information, whether that's final plats or some aerial photos to give you the 2 options that we brought forward at this point, to give you some additional information for that public hearing.
So it's not going to be a long lag of time. And if I could, just very quickly, one clarification, because I want to make sure that something that I said doesn't go without clarification. I misspoke, I believe. The packet that you have, and hold on to this and use it for your reference and review, is in an underlined strikeout form, and it's containing the Planning Commission recommendations to you, but it did not make the adjustment to the trail. So what you have, according to the staff report, what you have shows the trail along the water. And I think I said a few minutes ago that what you have, it shows the trail on the sidewalk. It does not. It shows it for the Parks Board. And what I need to get clarification on from Joanne is how our code and our process works. This is part of your overall comprehensive plan. It's a subordinate document to the broad comprehensive plan. And my experience is that the Planning Commission is the formal advisor to you and makes a formal recommendation to you. But I need to see where the Parks Board comes in. So it could be that what we are, short of a change of direction by the Planning Commission, it could be that what our code requires us to legally present to you is the Planning Commission's recommendation, which actually would be to put it out onto the sidewalk. But I might be mistaken. It could be on this one. It's the Parks Board that gets the formal recommendation. It's semantic, because the question will still remain, and we'll deal with that and make sure we have it right for next time.
And, you know, if this is something the neighbors want, I think one of the things we really owe them, I don't think we did well enough during the bridge discussion. And maybe we did, I just don't remember. But I really think before we even have a public hearing on this comp plan, if it's possible to put together some kind of a tent open house in that neighborhood with these plans, I think that would go a long way with a lot of people.
And we need to make sure that they understand that it's not
Right.
imminent. I mean, we're not going to go in and take control of their property. It's a projection of an idea.
But it's the
It's a
initial
plan.
step to start to get buy-in, if this is the
Right.
direction they want to go.
I would ask that we include that whole area, not just the abutting property owners, but the Turtle Terrace people too. Because when I was out knocking on doors telling people we're gonna make a mess of their street when we put that force line in, about 4 to 1, they were disappointed that there was no bridge. Whereas the people that showed up at the council meeting, it was overwhelmingly against the bridge, the pedestrian bridge. And the biggest thing, the biggest reason that they wanted the bridge was they said, basically, my kid could walk home from high school. He could stay for football practice and then walk home, whereas if there's no way to get across the river, it's several miles and it's too far.
Yeah. Well, that's a shame because we don't have polling capacity. I mean,
We don't
all
have
all
what?
we have to go off are people who speak up.
Right.
And the silent, unfortunately, get overlooked if they remain silent.
Right. David, with as much waterfront property as we have, be it the Columbia or from the bowling alley, north and east, would that be something that are we ever going to address those frontages? So in other words, if we're gonna open this door, should we bring all of those people in here to a public forum, if you will, and talk about what's on that? Because at least we would hear what that group has to say.
Yeah, that's a thought. I'm trying to look at the map and see if we are impacting
Yeah, I don't wanna go to the Columbia if we're never gonna address that anytime soon, but at the same time, if we are.
Rod, don't those areas differ significantly in the topography and the way they're laid out?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
That entire river changes 2 or 3 times in a 2 or 3 mile stretch.
But within a mile, either direction it falls, it changes dramatically
Right.
too, so.
What I'm thinking is it may be, you know, this is something that's a local issue, needs to be dealt with in small groups.
Yeah, it's, I would almost caution the council a little bit as you look at this one and to try and make sure and keep the discussion of the comprehensive plan itself in the context that it is. You know, there certainly isn't something, as Molly says, that's imminent coming towards anybody, any neighborhood or that type of thing. But what we're doing is affecting the comprehensive plan and an update to it for the entire city. So it, you know, on one hand, is there an issue that is potentially somewhere in the future to be dealt with in that area? Absolutely. Same as there is up in Doc Eldridge Park or anything else, as we start putting play equipment in and you have somebody says, I don't want you to put play equipment in because golly, if you do that, kids will actually be there playing and I like to sleep in until noon on Saturday. So, you know, the context this is coming back to you in the public hearing is simply for the update for the comprehensive plan, which will give us the ability or not the ability to plan things in the future as we move along and as situations changes, as funding becomes available, doesn't come available, those type of things. Anything that has to do with a trail through that area is gonna come back as a very specific item that will probably be well talked about from a whole lot of folks. But, you know, we're dealing with the comp plan for the entire community. So, and I certainly hear that, you know, it's one of those things you absolutely want to hear and be cognizant of what the folks in the area believe they want to see there. But at the same time, I mean, if you've got 10-to-1 folks throughout the community that say, I absolutely am in favor of a trail along the river, now how do you do that? Because there's only one river. So, it's, I think it's very important to keep in the context of where we're at in the discussion today versus where it may be down the road, should anything even come to pass on this thing. As Suzanne had mentioned to me last year, we've even got a couple of properties that are closer to the bowling alley that actually we do have easements on that were given as part of the development that we're in there and that type of stuff, and she was having issues then because people were, folks that actually owned the properties were encroaching onto the easements that they didn't believe the city even had, even though their plot maps, everything else clearly show it there. So even in the best of circumstances where you have it well before somebody gets there, you know, somebody's still gonna have a supposition of, until I can't walk anymore, it's mine. So, other questions on this item? Obviously, this is gonna come back for a lot more discussion, debate, and I'm sure we're gonna have folks weigh in on it, both from the planning commission and from the parks board, most likely as well, before we get to there, and we'll certainly have the benefit of not only Suzanne's, any additional information, Joanne's as far as planning or community development goes, or Mitch at that point, and our city attorney as well, as far as land use issues and legalities may go, or what things may be out there and be possibilities that other communities have dealt with, so. Other items on it for this evening? Okay. Dave, you'll keep us updated on that one, or someone will as it progresses towards us? And hopefully we've got notes on what we talked about, trying to get additional information to council before it comes to that point as well. Okay, fire. Chief.
Thank you, Your Honor. What you have before you is just an agenda bill. It is to have a 5-year lease agreement to monitor the fire alarm system at the fire hall. Currently, it's not being monitored. When we put the system in, we had an antiquated phone system, and we were able to Band-Aid it together to make it monitor. Now with the new phone system, it's not compatible with that existing fire alarm system. So we have to do an update on it. And what's out there now is they've had a wireless system that can do the monitoring, and that's being offered by Sonatrol, and you'll see 3 options down there in that matrix. And I'm asking the mayor to sign the Sonatrol option number 2. it's $400 more, but it doesn't tie us into purchasing the equipment, and it's good for 5 years, and then that way we're not responsible if it breaks down or anything like that. Questions on that?
Can you explain, when you say fire alarm, so is that any alarms from outside that are coming into the firehouse?
No, just for the fire station itself.
So this is only for fires that would be in the firehouse?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, remember, the minute you don't do this, we're gonna be one of those in the headlines where our own fire department burned down around the guys.
I know, but $4,000.
What would be
Do we have-
their,
that's over 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
What does this one cost?
what would be their response time in that situation?
Depends on whether
Pretty
they're
darn
gonna call or
fast.
not.
Hopefully, we never have to let you know.
And so,
I just wanted to mention that the port, just a couple of months ago, went through this same kind of question and procedure. And after talking to somebody else, they went with somebody else other than Sonatrol. A quick call to them might be worthwhile.
Okay.
If you haven't already talked to them.
Well, I know Sonatrol, well, the port called me and wanted permission to put that system in.
Oh, okay.
Sonatrol. And so I said, yeah, it's a new wireless system, but I will go ahead and contact them
Yeah,
and see if they can
just-
get
just
a
check
better
with-
price.
Just check with Dave Rip and see what they
Okay.
did.
so I just have another question. So if there is an alarm, then that alarm is relayed to
The monitoring.
the fire department. The monitoring company, and the monitoring company calls the fire department.
No, they-
Dispatch.
no.
I mean, we eliminated ADT because I think that's what it was, because we had had a couple of alarms that had gone totally unanswered. They said, we don't do that in Washougal. We said, why are we paying this $50 a week per
Thanks.
month fee? I mean, it seems kind of redundant to have a fire alarm system where the alarm goes to Sonatrol, and then they call out the fire department in Washougal for a fire at their own premise.
Well, if we're away from the station, we wouldn't get notified that there was a fire there.
Or if it's in another portion of the building where, you know, the guys are sleeping and everything is
Well, they,
on fire
Has that
somewhere
ever
else.
happened? And
well,
just-
no, they would be notified with that. But the thing is, by law, by NFPA standard, by fire code, I have to do it.
Oh.
It has to be monitored, so.
Yeah,
It's just
and-
how we
and-
do
And
it.
some of the businesses in the industrial park used to have it come straight in, phone would ring whenever they would do their, set it off. And that's been 15 years ago, that was the last time we did that. It's nice to have it there in some instances, but it's just
Not while you're not there.
not what we do anymore.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you know what this system,
I don't know. I can find out.
somebody set it off the other day in here.
I mean, we do see Sonatrol bills come through in the finance.
Did we?
I know we did a test to see if the panic alarm works, and it
Yeah.
works
Yeah,
really
for
well.
the fire department, actually. I think.
Yeah,
A couple days in a row, we
or
did.
water sewer utilities will call out wellheads, reservoirs, after hours.
So I've got a question for you about the three options that we have before us. So how long do you expect the unit to last if we were to buy it?
Well, that would be the thing with all the technology changes and stuff like that. By just not purchasing it, we're able just to go ahead and continue on and
Upgrade.
get upgrades and stuff like that without committing to buying it. If anything was to go wrong with it, then we wouldn't have to have somebody come out and fix it to the tune of so many $100. So I know it's a few dollars more, it's $400 more. I thought it was a better way to go, tying us into the system for 5 years.
That's amortized over 5 years.
Yes.
It's a 5-year price.
There is that element that he forces some business to put it in, but he doesn't have to have a partner.
And I've heard that, yes, I've
Oh,
heard
yeah.
that statement.
Other questions for Chief?
Just one last thing, with your permission, if I do, I'll contact the port, and if it does come in with something different, you might see that next week. Receive your packet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, PSA with Wallace.
Yes, this is in regards to sewer rehabilitation. We had Zawald from Tillman do some TVing and cleaning for us in 2009 and 2010. identified some trouble spots in our sewage collection system, specifically I&I, which is infiltration and inflow. So when we have heavy rains or bad seals on manholes, we'll see large influxes of flow at our wastewater treatment plant, which in, I guess, the layman's terms, gobbles up capacity for future expansion. So we've got manhole failure, joint failure, failing pipe. Specifically with this professional service agreement, the first task will be around a cast-in place or point repairs on sanitary sewer from 2nd Street, from C Street to the south side, close to the Hamilton sign on the south side of SR 14. We need to get in there and do some cast-in place prior to DOT going to construction and raising the highway. We had some turnback and turnover agreements that were executed by Mayor Gard after your approval. As part of that is some sewer rehab works, some cost sharing for impact the DOT will have on us with our utilities. And so this gets the ball rolling on those services that Walls would provide through contract documents, reviewing the tapes and making recommendations on how to do the repairs, and then ultimate construction phase service. I have talked to Dave a little bit in regards to city engineer on the heels of our discussion at planning session, and we're working that currently with the job analysis questionnaire and working that with human resources as well. Most of the tasks that are identified in the professional service and looking through the scope could be accomplished by a city engineer, full-time equivalent. Again, time sensitive in regards to the DOT project nearing construction, in the sense of what I've heard.
Questions?
I just find it interesting when we start to talk about sewer that we have all these words that we use that seem to make it a little more sanitary than some of the grosser
buzzwords
terms.
for
Yes.
trail development or sewer development, or, so.
Necessary, but nice.
Appropriate. Trevor, Jennifer, surplus backhoe.
Yes, I've been working with street store manager Will Noonan. We have an existing piece of equipment for rolling stock on hand. It's 82. It's a 310 backhoe, rubber tire backhoe. We've been quoted at right around $13,000 for trade-in value on that piece of equipment. I believe it was originally purchased by the street department, 101, in which we need to have it surplus by council, formal action to be able to do so. There's also some comparables, I believe, that are attached on the government bid line on what a similar piece of equipment as far as classification and hours and condition. And it looks like 13,000 trade-in is fair value. It also has the original purchase order, I think dating back to 1990 for purchase of around $36,000. So for how much wear and tear we've gotten out of that backhoe, quite a bit of resale value. Bodes well, speaks well of our mechanic and what he's done to our PMs, preventative maintenance on it.
Both Joe Russ and Bob Simmons both were here when that thing was purchased. David?
What does it cost us to maintain this thing for a year?
Oil changes, labor, I'm gonna say at least a couple $1,000 a year. Not running into any hydraulics or any type of engine or transmission issues.
Exactly, that's everything that I'm looking for. Are we getting to the point now where it's too expensive to maintain?
Yes.
That's all I need. Thank you.
I have a question for this one. Is this one where we have to hold a public hearing, or was this out of general fund?
This was general fund.
Okay.
The original purchase order shows 101, unless RJ found something different, that the enterprise funds purchased it.
No, there's no public hearing required.
Right.
This was
So
just solely to surplus it.
if it was enterprise through the water sewer or now stormwater utility, I think we would need a public hearing to be able to surplus / sell.
Any items for Trevor on that one?
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I would do, we're missing a public comment time in here. This would be the appropriate time to put it in.
don't think that we've even adopted any of that.
We started it last Monday, didn't we, at the last meeting?
Well, we didn't pass it though.
Oh.
Couldn't adopt any.
At your pleasure, could we open it up, just to see if there's anybody who wants to
Sure.
add anything?
Thank you, John. I'll take an opportunity. First of all, thank you for considering to open up this public hearing. I think that's what the point was, that this is gonna start happening, hopefully, as soon as we adopt it. So my comment is, thank you. And that's it.
Would you tell her?
I will tell there, oh, no, Mary knows already.
Okay, under Mayor's side, I just have two quick items. One, you'll see flags flying half-staff tomorrow. We've got notification from the governor's office today that she's ordered all flags, and we follow her stuff in honor of Jamie Bindle, the corrections officer who was killed yesterday up in the Shelton area of Monroe. The other item, cemetery board, we do have a position on the cemetery board that is coming up for reappointment in March. It's a position that's held by Wilbur Smith now, and Wilbur is asked to be considered just to be reappointed to that position. I know we've had discussions before about putting them out to the public on those ones. Not sure if you want to on this one or not. The cemetery board is one of those that we haven't generated a whole lot of interest on, and you have somebody that is contributing often to that board that's asked to be reappointed to there. So I'll leave that one for your consideration. Let me know if you want that to go outbound.
I just to be consistent, I would personally like to open it up for
Sure.
people to jump in.
No, yeah, and I think that's fine. I would like to say, probably something that most of you don't know is that the cemetery board members, if there is a funeral and the weather is, tolerable, those members go out for veterans and put flags out of the state of their birth and the state of their, residence and any affiliation flags that they had during their lifespan. Wilbur has always been great at going out, even sometimes in the most horrible weather, and putting out flags in anticipation of a ceremony at the cemetery. So I do value him highly.
Dave, any other items from yourself?
Not tonight.
Council members, Molly?
No, I don't have anything.
Paul? David? Michael?
There was one item I thought was kind of interesting that I wanted to bring to your attention. This is just a gee whiz thing. It'll take about 1 minute to do. The town of Discovery Bay in California passed, or is considering, or has passed, I haven't quite figured this out. It's a policy where the city won't accept cash anymore.
What?
Yeah, believe it or not. Then it was the main thrust of the article was towards understanding the reason behind why they did it. And if you ever hear about this, the main reason why they wanted to do it is so that people could not request public records anonymously. However, it also brings up the question of whether that's a good idea, just to accept cash or not. Anyway, thought that was kind of interesting for y'all. Beyond that, I don't have anything else.
Tell you that Lois Guard would today be canceling her trash, her water, sewer. Jennifer?
I don't have anything.
John?
Just two things. I think they're mainly for our city administrator. One is, when are we going to, are you currently working on the vetoed appointment code change?
Yep.
Okay. And then the other is the C-TRAN meeting with Camus.
Yeah, I have an inquiry into Paul and Lloyd about how to do that. I think that one's going to be pretty straightforward.
Right.
But yeah, that's in process, as well as the rules update that you gave guidance on at your.
And just so you guys know what we're talking about getting a couple members from here and a couple members from there, just to set up some parameters on the very vague RTC and C-TRAN bylaws, so that both cities can respect each other's votes and know where we're going.
Dave, did Paul get back to you on that today?
Not that I saw, but when I got back in right before the meeting, I didn't check my email, so potentially Lloyd is out of town.
Yeah.
What I just, while we're on that topic, Lloyd and I, just in brief conversation, kind of framed points for an informal agreement between the two communities that would say that we do 2-year rotations, and that beginning in 2012, Washougal will have the C-Tran seat and RTC for the other, for Camas, that when it is your rotation for a particular seat, that city makes the appointment for the primary and alternate, and that they unilaterally make that appointment, and by virtue of the standing agreement, the other city concurs. And that way we avoid conflict between the councils. And when it's your turn for a seat, you make that, you seat it, and the other community makes their seat. And then to address some of the concerns about engagement and checking in and updates and things like that, to put some language around some reasonable amount of updating and reporting, just so that the other community's in place. And if it works, and the administration and Camas is comfortable with that, I think what I might do is just go ahead and craft something up, and then we could, we might be able to skip a meeting.
Okay,
Might be able to
perfect.
just do it pretty straightforward.
That'd be perfect.
Just let me mention along those lines, there's a mosquito control board meeting tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the Clark County Public Works Mosquito Control Barn. For anyone who's interested, the agenda basically is an interlocal agreement with the county to provide the administrative and financial services that they've been providing the mosquito control board since it has existed. We've never had an agreement. This just codifies that agreement. And the other is the last time we looked at revenue and expenditures was in September, I think, may have been November. And so this is, 2010 is now complete. And I don't foresee any amendments to the budget as being necessary, but this would be the time that we might do that.
Just a real quick community development update. Community Development Committee just met last week. We're proceeding on 2 fronts right now, and I wanted you to be aware of it because you'll be seeing it probably within the month. One is to provide a mission statement for the committee itself. What is it we're supposed to be doing? Because there's not one in our bylaws or in the code. And the other is giving from council as a consensus, writing up this portion of the sign code that we're sending back to the Planning Commission, giving them some direction from us as far as what we would like to see in that. So we'll come up with the initial language and bring it to you guys to add to it or take away or change it up, and then send it off to them so they have some direction of where council's mind is on this. So I want to give you an update on that as well. That's it.
2 things. How's Don doing?
As far as I know, he's still doing well. I know we had put in a call to the home, and I haven't heard anything back off of that one yet. His wife said that all the recuperation seems to be going very well, so.
The other is, you probably aren't aware of it down there, but I would like to have the mayor issue some safety glasses at this end of the table. Between Schumacher and Molly, the stuff's flying off the paper. We're about to put our eyes out down here. In fact, Chief thought there was a drive-by shooting once.
I didn't go to a holster there.
Right.
I made a note, no binder clips.
Bigger ones.
Harvey?
Yeah, I have been in the position of being a civil service commissioner now for a year, and having spent 6 years in a major fire department in Seattle and 22 years as a police officer. And since being appointed, I have had a conversation with several firemen and police officers, and I am absolutely 100% satisfied with the performance of Chief Schumacher and Chief Mitchell based on the conversations I've had with the firemen and the police officers. I know I haven't had a chance to talk to you, Chief, but I have talked to Chief Mitchell. I'm just really, really satisfied. I'm bringing this up because of the Camas fire chief that's all of a sudden, he's not the fire chief anymore. And I hope that every council member here and the mayor has the same confidence I do in both chiefs and in the fire and police departments. And I thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sure.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry, Dave. I did do a ride-along last Saturday night with Corporal Troy Martin, he's the corporal, right? And I would like to do one again. I mean, it was just like 3 hours late on a Saturday night until about midnight. So it, you know, there were no guns drawn or anything like that, but it did really make me appreciate you know, our officers, our police officers, and what they're faced with, because every incident, and probably there were, you know, 5, 6, 7 calls during that time where they had to deal with something, he had to deal with something. And every time he got out of the car to deal with an issue, you know, it made me realize that there is an element of potential danger to that officer's, you know, well-being and to his life, really. So it was a very good experience for me, and I would certainly like to do it again. Encourage any of you to, you know, it's just a simple filling out the paperwork to do that.
I suggest you ride on Super Bowl Sunday night if you want.
That'll just be a lot of paperwork and a lot of blowing in your teeth.
I forgot to mention, the Regional Transportation Council meets tomorrow night, 4 o'clock at the Clark County Building at 1300 Franklin Street, 6th floor conference room, the training room up there. And it looks like the big 800-pound gorilla in the room for the next couple of months is going to be the completion of the 2010 update to the regional transportation plan that the feds require us to do. I'll be anxious to see how that goes.
And I will be there, Dave, so I mean, I'll be in the audience.
I will
I'll be in
appreciate
the
your
audience.
guidance.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
No other items, we're adjourned.
Well, I mean,
Reading the strikeout stuff.